the current crisis unfolding in Myanmar, events are happening so fast, it can feel challenging just to keep up with them. And we're working to increase our podcast production to stay abreast of this ever-changing crisis. Besides our podcasts, we encourage you to check out the blogs on our website, insightmyanmar.org, where you can also sign up for the regular newsletter. You can follow our social media as well. Just look for Insight Myanmar on your preferred platform. With that, let's head into our show.
Put to death for standing up against a military coup.
1st of February 2021, the day Myanmar's transition to democracy came to a halt.
Myanmar's ruling junta announced Monday that it had executed 4 pro-democracy activists.
Wide-scale election fraud was the reason generals used to justify taking back control.
Their deaths, the country's first executions in decades, were met with swift condemnation from international human rights organizations.
This is clearly a signal to the Myanmar people from the junta.
A claim denied by the Election Commission.
Thanks for taking the time to talk with us.
Hi, thanks for reaching out to me.
Yeah, so you're a Burmese living in France. You've been there for some time and have actually, before now, served as a diplomat there. So can you tell us a bit about how you first came to France and the role and capacity you served and what you were doing there when you first arrived?
Oh, okay. Because I happen to be the liaison officer between France and Myanmar, so that is the reason why I had the chance to come to France. But then I was living mainly in Myanmar. But I had, of course, some time passed in France at that time.
Right. And so can you tell us a bit about the early days of how you were able to get the post you did, the diplomatic post in which you were serving, and what you were doing in that capacity?
Oh, it started from the Burma Socialist Program Party days. And it was the time that we had to go through many procedures, especially for the diplomats through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And we need someone who knows about the country where the diplomatic mission is assigned, and also the other part of the country where the diplomatic mission comes from. So as I speak both languages and as I have passed many experiences through my family ties and through my parents' connections as well, I applied for the post and I got it. It is mostly, if I may continue, it is not only for the administration, not only for the diplomatic relations, but the hidden agenda is through the political connaissance, which means how you know about the political situation.
Tell us more about that.
Okay, during the Burma Socialist Program Party time, I had spent only 1 year or 2 years before the military coup in 1988. So it was not very remarkable compared to after 1988 events, because we were under the first military coup since 1962, and the restrictions were very rigid. And as you may have heard of those days, that a foreigner would be given only 7 days visa to come to Myanmar, and everything is under red tape. And it lasted for, when I joined the embassy, it lasted for about a year, over a year, and then all of a sudden the 1988 coup happened, and it changed another direction towards the diplomatic relations, how the embassies react to the then situation, and the political detainees at the time, how they were uh, supported by the international community.
And remind us, what year was it that you joined the diplomatic corps in Myanmar?
End of 1986.
Okay, so you were a diplomat basically for 2 years before 88. And at that time, 86 to 88, Myanmar was not really on anyone's radar anywhere.
No,
it was
no.
a lot of things happening in silence and without a lot of attention. And then 1988 to 1990 hits. And can you tell us where you were during those years, 88 to 90, and how being a diplomat representing Myanmar affected those events going forward?
Okay. I would be honest about my reactions then. In fact, I was mostly biased about having the political detainees released as soon as possible through the diplomatic pressure. And I was mostly working on it. Because at that time, unlike the 2021 military coup and the aftermath of 2021 military coup, the world has been silent and ignoring about the sufferings borne by the Myanmar people. But in 1988, the whole world turned their attention towards Myanmar, and it was very helpful and very effective for me to work through the diplomatic relations and putting on the pressure on to the voice of the international community to release the detainees and to speak up about Myanmar.
And where were you at that time? Were you actually in France between 88 and 90?
Yes. No, in Myanmar.
So tell us a bit more than what that role was, how you were appointed in that role, and what you were responsible or even allowed to do in that role as liaison.
In fact, the role was to perform the smooth relations between the two countries within the official framework laid down by so many protocol procedures and other diplomatic procedures. But within that limited framework, if you know how to play from the safe side, I mean, safe. If you know how to play it safely, then you can achieve certain goals from your own aspect. Like I would be giving advice to the French authorities through the diplomatic channel, who to contact to, who to, or which side to give to which side to give more pressure to, things like that.
And to further illustrate or put in people's minds exactly what you were doing, what those years was like, 88 to 90, can you recall any specific anecdotes or experiences or interactions that would be able to further illustrate the role that you were playing, as well as the type of conversations that was having that time between Myanmar and other Western countries?
Okay, Myanmar was under the military occupation, of course, but they started arresting the political parties leaders, including Aung San Suu Kyi, Uchi Maung, Utin U, and all the prominent leaders. And you may notice that some journalists went into exile, and some students went into the jungle to form their groups. They went to Thailand, they went to India, they went to America, and so on. So the international community, especially the Western group, and allied countries like UK, US, and France, would work out on protecting these people, and if they are in detention, they would cry out for the release of these people as soon as possible. But it doesn't, just by crying out for the release of those people would not serve. So we started looking for the EU visa ban and travel ban and economy ban on certain people and certain enterprises. It started with EU, I think. And we would have regular update of lists of people that could be banned under the regulations. It is to retaliate and to stop the further economic development of those people, and to punish them in a way, I would say. It is not right after 1988, but it I cannot recall the years exactly, but it gradually happened that way.
And at this time, you were in an official position, and the actions you were taking, I'm not sure if this was above board or perhaps in secret and so not known, but you're actually taking actions which are penalizing people in the military regime. Did you ever feel unsafe or threatened or at risk at this time?
Of course, I have been watched. I have been under the surveillance and under the watchful eyes of the military intelligence, and through I'm sure they have the list in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Myanmar Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They formally ask who are working with the diplomatic missions, and we have to submit the diplomatic missions had to submit a list of local people who are in connection with or who are under the diplomatic missions to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs every 3 or 4 months, and they would update it, including the drivers, gardeners, housemaids, everyone. So it was tightly controlled, and even when I move about, I know that they would be following me, but until today, I didn't know why I was not arrested, or I don't really understand at all. But sometimes they would be watching at me, when I come to the embassy, they would be sitting at the gate and looking at me. And when I go to certain places like NLD headquarters or to the NLD party members' houses, there would be informers and they would be taking pictures of me. But at the time, I think they are more focused on the people from the American embassy.
Right, and you were more connected with the French embassy.
Yeah, so the French are not as severely hated, I would say, because in the newspapers at that time they would be writing scornful articles on US and UK because of the and that was especially because of the radio services like VOA and BBC. They would say a sky full of lies, VOA and BBC, but for France, because of the language barrier, they may not know what we are saying or what we are publishing.
Right. And these were the days before Google Translate, so they couldn't just
exactly.
put it in the computer and see, right? So I think that's an interesting segue for trying to better understand the French response to Myanmar over the years. I think, as you mentioned, there's a lot of attention paid on the American and British side for various reasons, and I think that does open up a question of within the French government, with the French press, the French people, how have, being someone as yourself who's been a bridge over the course of your lifetime between these two cultures, how would you characterize going back from really 1986 through 88 to 90 through the transition period and then to today? I know this is a very big question, but to give us an overview from your early experiences of going to France, meeting high people in French government, French society, how would you characterize the relationship and the perspective from France of Myanmar?
Oh, at that time, I would say France is a very hospitable and welcoming to us, and they are real supporters of the democratic transition in Myanmar. And that is one of the reasons why Aung San Suu Kyi herself came to France after her release, and she had been given honorable titles like Legion d'Honneur and so on. But they had been very steady supporters from 1988 to 2016-17. But when Aung San Suu Kyi went to ICJ to testify in front of the court about the Rohingya, I think it was a failure for us. For us means for Myanmar. And it turned out to be unfavorable for the Western Bloc to support Myanmar, because when I'm in France, and whenever I talk about Myanmar, what they would have as the first impression is that Myanmar means Aung San Suu Kyi, who is not kind to Rohingya. That's it, and they don't want to hear any more about it. That is the reaction we are facing, and it is negative impact for Myanmar people, even though they may be issuing statements and so on that they condemn the military brutality and so on. But it is only on the paper. But in the past, from 1988 to 2011-12, it was substantial. Their support was substantial, not only releasing statements on the paper, but with my participation, I'm very proud to say that their support was very substantial.
And after Aung San Suu Kyi's visit defending the military's action, you found that substantial support, in your words, was not seen after that point.
No longer exists. No. And it is true that their media would release news on Myanmar, and they would talk about Myanmar for first 1 or 2 months after the coup in 2021. And after that, they kept totally silent. And whenever I meet people here, whenever I talk about the up-to-date news of Myanmar, the local people would be so surprised. Oh, is that so? Because we heard in the beginning about Myanmar, and then we lost track of what's happening in your country. This is the actual response I get here.
Mm-hmm.
But the authorities in the French government, of course, they know it.
Right. It was that fateful decision by Aung San Suu Kyi to come and defend the military's actions against the Rohingya. So given that decision was so fateful and so impactful, and really you could say so devastating for what it's done to erode support, not just for her, but for the country in general, do you have any sense or theory why she chose to do that?
I would understand. I could understand her situation at that time, because she was torn between two poles. That is the military and her victory and her potential victory in 2020 election. Because at that time, the entire population in Myanmar is also not very welcoming to the Rohingya ethnicity to be included in Myanmar population, and mainstream of the Myanmar people's concept about the ethnicity, Rohingya ethnicity, then she would have failed in her forthcoming election, because the general population is not favorable to Rohingya. This is my sentiment, my personal sentiment. And another thing is, she could even lose votes from the military camps. This is the first time that the military personnel were able to vote outside of the military camps. And she could have made a drastic difference if she had said, we have to accept Rohingya as our ethnic people. So she had no choice. And on the other hand, we have heard rumors like the coup could be staged during her absence from Myanmar while she is testifying in The Hague. And she was threatened by the military at the time. And she had all the time tried to coax military in her own intellectual way, but it didn't work, because she had asked that the military personnel be trained for civil-military relationship, and how the military should stay away from the civil administration for years, from 2013 to 2017, through the help of the British Military Academy.
Right. So whatever she was attempting to do was ultimately not successful in your perspective.
No.
Right. Now, looking at the current situation in Myanmar and looking at the ties between France and Myanmar, the one thing that strikes out, which I'd like to get your perspective on, as well as how it's being covered in France and if it's being covered at all, is the role of Total.
Oh, yes.
Can you first give some background on what Total is and what their interest is in Myanmar?
Oh, Total is the revenue generating company for France. That is for sure. So Total had been there for decades, and it helped the community in the pipeline areas from the oil wells to the place where they lay down the pipelines. They help the community, but for France, Total is a very huge company providing a lot of revenue for the government. So pulling out Total from Myanmar is a big blow for the let's say capitalist group people in France, because they would argue that Total is recruiting and employing 50,000 people in Myanmar, and they would lose jobs if Total pulls out. But they don't see that Total has been, or they see that, although they see that Total has been providing a lot of income to MOGE, Ministry of Oil and Gas Enterprise, but they also want, I think they also want to have the foothold in competition to other oil companies, because there are some other oil companies working in Myanmar, and but finally they agreed to pull out.
Mm-hmm, right. And during this decision, as they were looking at whether to stay in there and their work, as you mentioned, the oil revenue provides a great resource for the military regime, which then can use that to purchase weapons and other things to use against their own people. I'm curious about the relationship between Total to the French government, and where the French government was in wanting to influence what Total was doing, if they were putting pressure on them to leave, or if they were looking at ways to have them stay, or what people in the French government were saying and reacting to Total's presence after the coup.
Fortunately, that was the time when we had a big demand that Total should leave the country to let the French people know about Myanmar. But after that, it died out because the news from Ukraine has overshadowed the news of Myanmar.
Right.
But even then, now not many people talk about Ukraine here.
Yeah, people have a short attention span. That's for sure.
Yes.
Yeah. So as someone who has been in diplomatic circles for so long, between Myanmar and France, especially, other countries I'm sure as well, since the coup happened, there has been a real discussion of legitimacy, of who is actually the rightful representatives of Myanmar. And that has played out in the United Nations and ASEAN, but also in embassies around the world. Who is actually controlling these embassies? Is it sympathizers with the regime, or people that are close with NUG or democracy movement? This can be somewhat confusing for outside observers to understand how are representatives chosen by international community and bodies, how are things verified. So can you break down a bit what has been the struggle since the coup to determine who is the legitimate representatives in diplomatic circles among those trying to represent Myanmar to the outside world?
Mm-hmm. Like you want to say the representatives from the NUG?
Well, let's look first at embassies. Let's look at, and I guess we could start locally with you because you're in France, and then look at wider Europe, because obviously the Myanmar embassy in London has been quite interesting what happened there.
Yes.
But just in terms of the embassies itself, how is it determined which people working at the embassies, where their allegiances actually lie?
Oh, some of the embassy staff, Myanmar embassy staff, went for the civil disobedience movement. Some do not. And some ambassadors, for example, the Myanmar ambassador in France, he did not observe the civil disobedience movement, but we cannot say that he is totally pro-military, or he is whether he is a pro-democratic movement, because he is just sitting. We call it sitting on the fence, and he was not recalled yet, and he had not been replaced by any military personnel yet. I call it yet because they can be for the posts like US and UK. There are a lot of shuffles. He is a career diplomat. He had never been in the military service, but there are people who would say that, oh, don't go and approach him because we can never trust him. So I don't contact him, and we never know whether he would report anything back to the regime, or he would be just doing his regular diplomat's job. But it is very likely that he would be reporting what's going on here. Especially there are some Burmese people who fled the country, some journalists, some photographers who fled the country, and they are here. They are harbored by the French government on special conditions, and it is through the individual efforts of each embassy. I think it depends also on the head of the mission and also by the government. Although they may not be openly speaking that we recognize NUG, it is, I think, very political, I would say, that it goes beyond the diplomatic procedures. It goes up to the superpowers, like who is on the side of China, who is on the side of Russia, who is on the side of US, and so on. So I think France is playing a safe game. Like they would harbor those who fled the country from Myanmar. They would be given special visas here. They would be asked. They would be provided some allowances like social security and special privileges, some immunities here, although they may not be given as a refugee status. But it has been ongoing since last year. There's no clear cut decision like, oh, we recognize NUG, we don't recognize this embassy. No, because they also care for their ambassador residing in Myanmar, because the ambassador has been there since before, I think it's since the time of Aung San Suu Kyi, because he handed over the credentials to her, to Wu Min, the president. So if something happens to him, if there's any penalty or some kind of a harsh treatment to the Myanmar diplomat in France, the retaliation would be given to the French ambassador in Yangon, and I think they are quite concerned about that. I think all embassies are quite concerned about it.
Yeah, I've heard similarly. And in the case of the French ambassador in Myanmar, I've heard that he's really been one of the most outspoken critics of the regime, even and supporters of the democracy movement, even while still serving as an ambassador there. How
Mhm.
much do you know about his activities and the stance that he's taken there in Yangon?
Uh, Before the coup and the early days after the coup, in my impression, he underestimated the impact of brutality and the unlawful acts by the junta. But then I explained him many things, including the need to provide R2P, because we foresee that the civil war, or so-called the PDF against the military council, would come to the country one day. Although at that time we cannot figure out in what kind of institution would be formed, but gradually we see that the PDFs were formed. But at that stage, he was not very convinced that the result of the coup would be so negative. But more months, after more months, some more months, he discovered and he realized that things are not going well. So I think he's very helpful and uh, standing for the, and he stands for the activists, and he's very outspoken because he sees things how it happened before him,
Right.
and he himself went out and welcomed the demonstrators right in front of the embassy. I think he is one of the rare diplomats who went out and welcomed those demonstrators personally.
So going back to the question of Myanmar embassies around the world, I wonder if you're aware of any one serving ambassador or otherwise who is working at a Myanmar embassy somewhere in the world and openly supporting the democratic movement and the and not standing for the regime, or is that not really happening? Are people either silent or supporting the military?
Myanmar ambassadors?
And right, ambassadors or other high-ranking staff.
I don't see anyone except for Uchomoton from UN, as the UN representative of Myanmar. No.
So he is the only one that really stands out as
Yes.
having really broken from what the military did. Can you, for those listeners who might not be aware of him and how significant this moment was, can you tell us who Chamotun is and what exactly he did that put him on the map?
At the moment he spoke about Myanmar on his at his very first speech at UN, we were thrilled and we were really touched by his response, and we were so much encouraged to see that someone very important and high-ranking like him supported the democratic movements and the people of Myanmar. And we didn't expect that a very ordinary diplomat during his career, because he was not a very outstanding person when I was in the service. So, but gradually he reached to that position, and that was due to the promotions given during Aung San Suu Kyi and women's time. I think he really felt that he should do something for us, because in the past he was known as a very quiet but very kind person.
And after that happened, I remember some writers speculating that will go down as one of the more important moments in United Nations history. It was a very emotional speech he gave in the United Nations, supporting the democracy movement. For something that has been that significant, looking at in a historical context of the speech that was made, did it really have any impact? Since making that talk, did it result in anything that substantial we can look at that might not have happened if he hadn't have taken that stance?
Oh yes, of course. It is a turning point for NUG, for PD, for all of us.
How so?
Because it is like very because he's in a very important position, and a person at that position is on the side of the democratic movement. Then it is nothing else but the most encouraging thing for all of us, because he is placed at a very pivotal role, and he's playing for us on our side.
Now, another significant event that happened in the diplomatic world happened last year at the Myanmar embassy in London. Can you share a bit about what happened there and why it was significant?
Cho Min, the then ambassador, was also a person who was sitting on the fence. He did not observe the CDM movement, but he and not only that, he's also very close to the. He's also from the military group. He was not the career diplomat, but anyhow, he had been serving in UK for some time, and he wanted to continue as his. That is the impression we got, because we don't really know what his feelings are. But we had a feeling that he wanted to continue his service as the ambassador, and but at the same time he didn't follow the CDM movement. But when he heard that the military attaché would be replaced as the ambassador, then he started the CDM movement. And it was then that he was locked out from the embassy. But not many people pity him as a reaction of his situation there.
So it was the pro-military people in the embassy who locked him out of his office while he was at lunch.
Yes.
And how did the London police or government respond to this? When there's this kind of internal strife at an embassy, what is the proper response of what the host country could or should do?
Of course, the host country has the duty to protect the diplomat. So I think the London police controls the mob and the curiosity of the people who gathered around the embassy. And I think they did not, but when I saw the footage of the video clips, they did not break through the doors of the embassy. But the London police just tried not to have a public disorder at that place.
And what's the status of that ambassador now?
He's still there.
So he was locked out temporarily, but then he was able to go back and retake control.
I have no other information on London, but it is like a parallel ambassador, the military appointed military attaché who is named as the ambassador, and Jo Min, who was named by who was accredited by women, the democratic government. I have no other information on that.
Right. I suppose it must be really difficult and really confusing for a lot of these diplomats, who many of whom came through the democratic period and the NLD and were representing the country in that capacity following in the period of the democratic transition. Mm-hmm. And then you have a military regime that illegally takes over power and declares itself the new rulers, but are not seen legitimate by anyone in the country. They violated the democratic process. And they're also not seen legitimate as most countries outside, with the exception of someone like Russia, Belarus, China, etc. And so these diplomats, I imagine it must be a somewhat confusing situation for them to be in, where they are still representing the country as a whole, but this question of legitimacy of who actually is controlling it, and thereby who controls the country, is also the official messenger of through the embassies and the diplomats that are representing them, and so it kind of, as someone who hasn't really spent a lot of time in diplomatic circles, it makes me wonder what happens when these diplomats around the world find themselves in that position, and how they where they're supposed to put their allegiances to, and how they make that decision.
Yes, that is a very good question, and this is the question we've been asking among ourselves over and over again, and we don't understand why the entire world, especially the democratic countries, do not recognize the National Unity Government, NUG, and why they are still acknowledging the military council in one way or the other. What we heard as the explanation from certain diplomats we've met is that because there's no territorial occupation by NUG. And I think it is the most unreasonable answer, because how can one imagine the NUG to occupy the territory? Because once they go back into the territory, they will be arrested and they will be executed. They can only be the government in exile. Mm-hmm. That is the only excuse we always hear. Like, oh, there's no territorial occupation. Of course not. So it is like a tug of war between NUG, and you may see that Zema Aung, the Minister for Foreign Affairs of NUG, has been repeatedly demanding for the recognition.
This issue of territory is really interesting on a couple of levels. So one thing to mention is that it is not true to say that the NUG, or if you want to say the allied forces, the EAOs, the PDFs, however you want to call that coalition, or different anti-military groups, it's not a true statement to say that they do not hold ground. They do not hold territory. There are constantly statistics coming up showing how much territory they actually control. And I guess you can define what control is, but in some of those cases, the PDFs and by extension the NUG control some territory to the extent that they are able to have schools and other functions that they carry out. Yes. And the percentages vary. I've heard anywhere from 33 to 66%, just to put a number in there. But it's not a correct statement to say that they don't hold territory in the whole of Myanmar. If you want to say they don't hold cities or they don't hold capitals, okay, that's fair. But they do hold territory.
Yes. That is why we are not very pleased with the international community's reaction on Myanmar. We are not happy. We are not happy with the reaction by the international community. It is like the international community is letting the whole nation vanish by neglecting us in different ways.
And the second part of that thing about territory, which doesn't really make sense or is problematic, is the corollary of that statement that they don't hold territory is really an implicit suggestion that by hook or by crook, by violence or any other means, if you or really any group were to take and hold that territory, then you would be legitimate by virtue of having that territory in hand.
Mm-hmm.
And so over time, we've seen PDF groups and EAOs and NUG leadership begin to realize that rather than following the normal procedures of trying to build alliances or talk to international partners, build coalitions, that they simply need to find a way by any means necessary to take this territory. Of course, Myanmar's not getting any support, nothing like Ukraine.
No.
They've had to manage everything by themselves against a professional grade military, which sources from China and Russia and other places. And they have been put in a corner where they have had to rely on untrained citizenry to be able to try to retake and then hold land in the hope that if they can do so, then perhaps they might receive some legitimacy. But the problem with this is that as soon as, because all of these negotiations, discussions, ask for support, R2P, et cetera, because everything has failed so devastatingly and dramatically, they have been forced to take up an armed resistance and to be able to resist the military and protect their communities in this way. And as that armed resistance has begun to build, then there's been quite a bit of criticism for, well, both sides are doing this, and we don't want to see a resort to violence on either end. And so there's this, it seems to me, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are in your position of having been in diplomatic circles, there seems to be this contradictory kind of attitude where on one hand, it's, well, if you take and control land, then you have some kind of legitimacy. But then you have this mixed message on the other hand saying that violence should never be resorted to for any reason, and that you should try to let diplomacy and conversation and negotiation try to succeed, and that there's been growing concern that by any side that tries to that is not being nonviolent in every method. And so, what do you think about that?
Okay. First, I will answer the second part that is about nonviolence and negotiations. So, if you look back the chronicles of our 2021, we call it Spring Revolution. In the first days and months, the demonstrators were protesting peacefully on the streets. You will even see the images of demonstrators kneeling before the armed soldiers, giving flowers or pleading them in a nice way. And they went out on the streets in different groups of community, showing their strong suggestion of strong opposition of the military rule. But gradually, when the days went by, the military group started by shooting with sniper guns to the girls, and later on into the crowd. More killings followed, and as a human being, you will never be able to discuss at that time. Peaceful discussion is out of the question when the other party started using aggressive arms. So everybody, even though it is a norm that negotiations on the table should take place, nobody would accept that, it is time to negotiate, because the time to negotiate has passed because of the breach of trust from the military side. It showed the actions from the military showed that we can never trust them, and the time for a dialogue is over. So even though there are practices like very classic, conventional practices like discussing through ASEAN and UN and so on. So, and you also saw that Aung San Suu Kyi did not respect all the 5 points proposed by ASEAN until now. So, discussion or dialogue is out of the question. The only option for the people is to retaliate through the guns. So we cannot stop PDF to fight against the military regime. And I think it is the only language that the military would understand. It is, of course, not complying or not in conformity to any diplomatic relations or to diplomatic norms.
And these democratic forces have been forced in a corner where this is the only way to respond, and yet there's been virtually no outside support and even very little sympathy or understanding for why they're doing what they're doing.
No sympathy from the international community?
It seems to me, right, that
yes,
there hasn't been...
It's true. No sympathy, no empathy, I would say. And they don't care how many people are caught, how many people are killed a day, even though we've been sharing news and we've been crying out in many ways around the world. No, they would just let us, for example, in places like New York or in Tokyo or in Singapore, or they would let us do whatever demonstrations, even in France. They would let us do the demonstrations, expression of our feelings, but that's it.
So what do you think it would take to break through? This is a question I often ask myself, I feel like we're in this echo chamber where those of us who care about what's happening in Myanmar continue to talk to each other over and over on loop. And we need to break out of that. We need to talk to people outside of the community of those who care about Myanmar and reach people who should care about human rights and democracy and progressive values everywhere in the world to try to find an angle to bring to them what's happening, why it's important, whether that's government or media or different progressive groups. It's what I've been trying to do through this podcast or through other means. But it just seems like no matter how terrible the story, and not just the stories, but the pictures, the videos, the testimonial, the interview, everything else, all of this information is there, whether it's documented from human rights organizations, whether it's told through a personal story or narrative, whether it's a shocking or cruel video that shows an act of atrocity taking place. It just seems like it is so hard to break through and when one does break through, it's only for something really terrible happens. It might just be for a few hours or however short a news cycle is these days, and then it moves on. So what do you think it takes to try to break through that and really make this be an issue that people care about and are sustained for a longer period of time?
People, I would answer in a different way. people would be happy to see that the perpetrators are taken to justice. And the only justice that can take action is through the international courts. We had been very hopeful when last year we heard that the Supreme Court of Argentina is going to open a case against Myanmar and so on. So why, I don't know why and where that procedure is going, and how far has it come. We have no idea about it. We just heard some sparks of hope, and then it went silent. So people would be very happy and would be relieved to, because they are. It's like they are holding their breath while they are being drowned. So we don't know how long people can stand to the pressure. In addition to the economic and health pressures, the inflation, everything, they are living nothing else but with hope. So that the ray of hope can be given, and only through the international justice system. It will be the only solution to save many lives from being killed, and millions of dollars or chats being spent on supporting buying arms for PDF, and many lives killed on PDF side. The sooner the justice has been brought to the perpetrators, the better for the country.
And going back to this issue of territory, it also reminds me of this recent controversial statement by Dr. Sasa, or actually I should say it's something he said that became controversial, where he referenced in a Zoom meeting that if the Democratic forces were to take over Yangon, the guns would come raining down. And that statement, I should say it's a alleged statement, because I don't know if there's a recording. I think it's been reported, but I'm not sure exactly what he said or the context, but that's how it's been relayed. And it's been criticized from a number of different angles. One for promoting an armed struggle to try to take a city, and saying that once they do, support would come. It's also been criticized by those in the PDFs for being naive in terms of believing that international support would actually come or could ever come.
No.
But what are your thoughts on that statement and the reaction that it's caused?
I think it's absurd, because and it has no grounds.
How so?
No, because as you said, it has not been voice recorded, and we never know whether it is authentic or not. But we have come this far, and we have seen that there is no international support, especially to support in terms of arms and ammunition. We cannot. So it shows that we should not expect that the Yangon, once the PDF take hold of the Yangon, there would be more international support on arms and ammunition. I don't think it is relevant.
But it does seem that there's this hypocrisy coming from the West that is supporting, at least as they say it, is ostentatious, say it again, is that the West is supporting through their voice democratic institutions and democratic processes. And yet when this military is illegally seized power, and there is an attempt to use these international agencies and ideals of democracy to try to find a solution, there's complete silence and a lack of support. And that the only way to get that support, or to be seen as legitimate is to bypass these democratic institutions and processes which these countries hold so dear and which they spend so much time talking about, and to just physically retake the land.
Yeah.
And it just becomes this brute action that needs to be taken when those democratic ideals have all been shown to really to dissipate and float away.
It's a very confusing situation. Maybe you have read in very recently from the Norwegian news journal, about the misbehavior of the Norwegian embassy in Yangon. It shows that the Norwegian embassy, or Norway, is known to be the country very helpful to the democratic movements. That is the country which has the Nobel Peace Prize awards to the people in the world, and we have had high respects on Norway. But when we saw that in that article written by the Norwegian news, that the embassy itself has been using the premises of a Lotte Hotel, which is owned by the military general's son, who himself is also a military general, on Pier Road, and spending a lot of dollars on renting the place. We cannot understand, and we don't know who to rely on or who to ask for help when a country which is known for very democratic, which is known for a high value of democracy, is behaving like this. And even Australia, maybe you can go back and check the Australian embassy. At the same time, Australia has been welcoming and giving visas to those who fled the country, and also to the skilled workers, because knowing that the country is deteriorating in terms of economy and job opportunity, they employed a lot of people from Myanmar and give work visas. But at the same time, the Australian embassy is using millions of dollars at that Lotte Hotel. So it is very difficult to understand the reaction of the diplomatic missions and the government back home in their country. Luckily, France is not behaving like this. America is not behaving like this. German, no. British, I don't know really, because the British ambassador had been asked to leave the country because they stepped down the level from the ambassador to chargé d'affaires. So big countries like Australia and Norway became under our attention as the black, for us it's a blacklist country, because once they start using millions of dollars into this hotel, and how can we trust them?
And then there's Japan that invited.
Oh, Japan. Oh, yes. Oh, no.
Go on. Yeah. Tell us what Japan did.
Oh, Japan has been hosting the military trainees still. Even though the Japanese journalist has been detained, they are still holding the military trainings to the Myanmar military personnel in their country. And all the activists, including those Myanmar living in Japan, are protesting against the government not to receive or to send the military personnel back home. They do not care. And Japan is just interested in the economy and their business and their money. That's all. So that is the slogan. The PDFs or the or the democratic movement used to say that we only have us for us.
One
Yeah.
can understand why.
Yeah. We don't know who to turn our back on.
And you reference these Burmese who are living abroad in countries around the world, just as we talked about the somewhat confusing situation for diplomats who leave Myanmar representing what they think is the rightful leadership at one time, and then that leadership is replaced and they have to figure out how to navigate that way. You also have a number of Burmese who are abroad for all kinds of reasons, whether their families have settled there or they're studying or working something temporarily, whether they're exiles or refugees, whether they left since the coup because they were in danger. But one of the problems that's been developing in the last few months, we've been hearing quite a bit about, is the challenge of Burmese whose passports have expired and they need to go into the Burmese embassy to get new passports. And in many cases, those are no longer being issued. And so many Burmese are becoming stateless. Can you tell us a bit about what you know about this?
Oh, I have heard that the embassies around the world received instruction from the military council not to issue or extend new passports or the validity of the passport to certain people, and it amounts to 80,000 persons. This is the rumor I heard. And back home in Myanmar, the passport renewal or the delivery, the issuance of new passports are first filtered through the names that are already listed in the immigration office or the Ministry of Home Affairs. First, and nobody is going through the proper procedures. They are all going through the brokers. The brokers are the ones who would bribe the officer in charge of the passport delivery. And at the passport office, the officers would be in rotation. Nobody would be sitting at the same desk for long because they would be taking a lot of bribery and they would be in connection with the brokers. So whoever the officer would be there, the broker would bribe the officer, and he would ask more money from the applicant, passport applicant. For example, a few weeks earlier, the brokerage was like 350,000 kyats. Now it has gone up to 500,000 kyats. And if you apply for the passport, the first thing they would check is whether your name is in the list. And it is like a feasibility test. So if I want to apply for the passport, then they will say, okay, let me check if your name is there. And before my name was checked, I have to give all my personal data, my name, my national identity number, my address, my family list. So whether before I was given the positive or negative answer, they have already got all my information.
Right. So they're becoming spy agencies abroad.
Yes. And when you apply or when you extend your passport validity in the Myanmar embassy, the procedure is more or less the same. You have to fill up a form and you have to provide all your personal data. And then they will reply that, okay, your name is not in the list, so we will provide you with a passport. and please come back on so and so date. That is what they would do, and they would answer now.
Yeah, this has become quite dangerous for many Burmese living abroad and not knowing how their embassy is trying to report on them. And in one case, I have a Burmese friend who's in Thailand now and is completely unable to extend her passport, which is expiring. And so has to fly back to Yangon and do it there, but then obviously has to undertake all kinds of safety precautions of not knowing. Obviously, when you go back to Myanmar now as a Burmese citizen, there's no guarantee of your basic human rights or safety, and so this has become quite perilous.
There is no guarantee either whether you would be issued a passport or not. For example, I have a friend who asked for she is not at all involved in any politics, but she just wanted to have a valid passport so that she can leave the country whenever she wants. And she applied for the passport with the bribery, with the increased rate of bribery from 350,000 to 500,000 kyats. And yet, she was given the answer that, oh yes, your passport has been approved. And we know your passport number already, but the passport, the document has not been given to her yet. So until and unless she receives the passport in her hand, she cannot be relieved whether she would be really having the passport or not.
I've heard there's been some talk within the NUG of trying to remedy the situation by issuing their own passports. Is that something that's even possible?
Yes. It depends on which NUG representative office is saying. Like some, I think, very outstanding NUG office is in Czech Republic, because the Czech government is very supportive to NUG. And they let whatever NUG do in terms of administration and the formalities. So the Myanmar exiles in Czech are quite quite free to do whatever they want to do.
So that's one country out of several hundred in the world where Burmese living have some kind of guarantee. But for those living in other places, I don't know how diplomatic rules work.
It depends on the host government. Like in Japan, it would be very difficult. France, I don't think they would be given they would have the power to issue like passports or any other travel documents equivalent to passport. But US, I don't think so. It depends on each host government.
Right. So in many cases, these people just simply become stateless. They have a choice of either trying to go back to Myanmar and disrupting their life and perhaps family and occupation, livelihood, where they are, and going into a place where there's no guarantee for safety anywhere, or becoming illegal, stateless in some way, or depending on the host country, praying they can apply for some kind of status where they're able to continue their life there. So this is really an enormous difficulty on tens of thousands and perhaps more.
Yes. For example, those in Sweden, I know some people were already in Sweden, and they are given a special document that they are allowed to stay legally in Sweden, but they cannot travel outside of Sweden. It's not a refugee, but it's not a refugee status, but something like a legal stay permit status. And it's the same in France, I think. They are not given, because we know there are some people who arrived after the Spring Revolution, and they were given special status. They were given social benefits, special social benefits. But they are not given a French passport or any other travel document. But they are not considered as a refugee either. So it's a very delicate and complicated administrative matter. As long as the host country is okay with the status of that person who is living in the country, the person can stay freely and legally and enjoying all the rights, but they may not be able to go back to Myanmar. They may not be travel to other country.
Right, that's tough.
Yeah, that's
Now,
tough.
we've talked about the Myanmar embassies around the world. Another thing that's cropping up are NUG offices. These are not so much diplomatic institutions. They're certainly not recognized as embassies, but the NUG has been able to establish different offices in a handful of countries around the world where they've appointed official representatives of the NUG to be able to represent their interests. What do you know about this?
The NUG representative offices around the world, like in Japan, Korea, Australia, Czech, France, and I'm not sure about US because US has Ucho Moton and other prominent figures. So some NUG offices are very active and quite strong in terms of their capacity to reach out to the host governments. I think the strongest is from Czech because of the host country's flexibility and its welcoming gestures towards a Myanmar democratic movement. And Australia, France, not so. In the past, yes, but gradually now it has faded away. And it was just holding some occasional gathering of Myanmar people living in France or for some activities to show the support or to protest against certain causes.
Mm-hmm.
Because the problem is, or the weakness is that NUG could not finance those offices and the representatives. Those representatives had to find their own way to survive and to run the office.
This again points to this hypocrisy of places like Australia or Norway renting very expensive hotels in Yangon where millions of dollars go towards the regime, while single representatives and single offices in those countries, those democratic countries, are not able to be maintained for NUG representatives because there is simply no money. That's not even to touch upon the millions or perhaps billions, I don't remember the exact number, of frozen money in the US that from the NLD that the NUG is not even able to access.
No. It's a shame. It's a real shame.
So concerning the situation with just the diplomatic circles, looking at embassies and official channels, this has been mostly what we've talked about for this full chat, just because you're in those circles, you have that information.
Oh, yes, because the diplomatic missions play the most important roles in liberating a country from the oppression or pulling the country down into oppression. Or it is like I would like to quote Nelson Mandela's famous statement like those who are ignorant about the oppression are also those who are silent in times of oppression.
And that's why it's been so valuable to be able to talk to you about the behind the scenes of the diplomatic missions, to better understand how these mechanisms are actually working for those of us who've never had any interaction with that. So with that in mind, is there anything else that about these diplomatic missions or processes or anything else on that topic that you think would be interesting to share?
Oh, sorry, I just want to correct. Yes, it's from Desmond Tutu. If you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. Yes, it's true. So the diplomatic circle can play a very vital role in helping shape the country's development or its poverty or its misfortune, whatever. First, I would like to say that the head of the mission or the whole diplomatic mission, the personalities recruited in the mission should be, according to my experience, especially those who are in the political roles. I'm not talking about the administrators like the other, lower level diplomats, but the top level diplomats should be at least ethical. First thing, ethical and should be respectful, because if they are not ethical, their reports towards the government would not be genuine. And this is what I have also reminded to Aung San Suu Kyi myself. Some diplomats are not ethical and they are not hardworking. They rely on their staff members to give them reports, because they have to write reports to their ministry and to the government regularly. And the content of the reports can vary from the authenticity or the closeness to the truth to the totally distorted ideas. For example, I have suggested to Aung San Suu Kyi that she should check on the diplomatic heads of the diplomatic missions and and how they function, their responsibilities. Because, for example, if the diplomatic staff goes to a crisis place, then he would take notes and report back to the mission or to the head of mission. It may vary if the head of mission himself goes there and takes the note and report back to the mission. Because sometimes he's maybe so lazy or too busy to go to that place, and he would rather delegate one of his staffs just to go there and take notes. And sometimes, or not sometimes, many times, that it makes a huge difference depending on the preoccupied ideas of that person. That person may be related or in relation to certain people of the place, of the crisis place, or he or she may have some personal sentiments on this crisis, and all these things can change the content of the report. And this report is very crucial for the government to decide on how to react to the situation.
I think this is all underlying the importance that
Yes.
the diplomatic missions and the people in those roles serve, especially in the current moment.
Yes.
And
And not it is. I'm not talking about the current moment, but for the. I have gone through many incidents that these contents of the reports make the difference on the decision of the governments.
I see.
Mm.
You said something really powerful a few minutes ago, that the diplomatic missions, protocols, circles, these have an enormous responsibility to play in being able to prevent or at least diminish oppression in other countries. And so that does lead to looking at the present moment, looking at Myanmar. In my view, and I don't have privileged access to behind the scenes, but in my view, it seems that on the diplomatic front, it's just been an enormous, colossal failure. We've seen hypocrisy, we've seen inaction, we've seen undue criticism, a complete lack of support. So from my standpoint of not really having the inside track, admittedly, but from my standpoint, I would venture to say that these diplomatic circles, which have the ability to prevent or diminish oppression, have been a massive, colossal failure in the case of Myanmar since the coup.
Yes.
Would you say that I'm being unfair, or would you agree with that?
Especially when I talk about the diplomatic circle, it covers everyone, like China, Japan, Russia, the Western Bloc, everyone. Yes.
So you would assess they've been derelict in their responsibility?
Yes.
Is there anything that can be done about that? Is there any hope for change or for improvement?
Yeah, when they know that they have to, they are dancing according to the tunes of their governments. So it depends. It goes back to, if it is for US, it goes back to Washington. If it is for France, it goes back to Paris. So if the government or the president is not showing interest in this affair, then they would be happy spending some time just reporting regularly and getting their very high paid salary and spending time in Myanmar, going back quite with a big fat pocket of salary. That would be the case. But if the government shows interest in certain countries, then they would have to work really hard to be in line with their government. So it is not the diplomats. It is not only on one side at the same time. Sure. As I said, it is it is like two hands clapping together. The diplomats on one hand and the government on the other hand. If the government shows interest in the country, then the diplomat has to work hard. And at the same time, if the diplomat works really hard to impress or to give the impact, his views on certain countries, then I think it will give some significant impact on the government as well. Because he's the one staying on the ground of the country at the time of the situation or the time of the crisis, and he is the one who is the eyewitness, I would say, and he could say everything back to his country.
Right. Well, it's distressing. I'm at a loss for words. I was about to say, let's hope for improvement or for a positive change, but those words just seem incredibly hollow and meaningless to say in light of the kind of failures and hypocrisy we've seen. So I don't really know what to say.
Yeah, but I think the world has changed from what I see now is the world has changed. The world's trend has changed from 1980, from the years like 1988 to 2000 something to the present era. Because everywhere I look, starting from that COVID and the vaccines and everything, the world is so money obsessed. Every country, especially the rich countries, Japan, US, France, whatever, they, in my opinion, they support Ukraine because the whole European bloc is scared that the war from Ukraine would spread to the rest of the Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And that is why they support Ukraine at the cost of Ukraine. And the other countries like Japan, far from Europe, a rich country, they support the Western Bloc because he wants to be in good business with the Western Bloc and he wants to be protected for himself from Russia, from China. That's it. And ASEAN, some countries like Malaysia and Indonesia, they are speaking up about the democratic movements and the failure from the Myanmar side not complying with their ASEAN 5 points. Only it only ends up in the air, and it's not substantial. Because they just wanted to uphold the legitimacy of ASEAN. That's it. Otherwise, ASEAN, the community, ASEAN community would be just be standing for the namesake, just to save their name. They are saying something, I think. And some other countries like Brunei or Singapore, once or twice, yes. Thai, no, not at all.
So what do you think could happen reasonably that could make an impact and could shift things for the positive? Are there actions on a big or small level that would make you hopeful?
To be honest, we are hoping that the proposed elections that will be convened by May Aung Hlaing in early 2023 would not take place, and that nobody would go and vote, and even some polls would be destroyed by PDF or other forces, or by the people themselves. And we are depending a lot on the donation to PDF, but it is not enough, that we all know. And I don't know what NUG's agenda is, because NUG is quite far away from all of us, because they are just releasing their statements, but we don't know their agenda. The people do not know their agenda. It is quite difficult to say at this moment what would come of in near future.
I see. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to us. I just want to refocus back on you and your experience. You're a Burmese who has come to find a second home in France. And I just have a question about that experience. As you've come to make a home in a community in France and you've gone from one culture to the other, I'm just curious what the experience has been like to be in a different culture and country and community like France, and what you might say about the differences and the similarities between French society and Burmese society that you've been able to discover.
Oh, the first thing is because I think because France is not a stranger to me, so that is one reason, and the another reason is because I have some contacts here, and that makes me easier to come here. But when I came here, unlike the past, when I was involved in the liaison work, I felt the discrimination by the French community, because I sense that because I look like a Chinese, so to them, Chinese are the ones who brought the COVID, who are exploiting the economy, and they don't seem to like me. And another thing is, France has a huge community of African people, and those African peoples dominate a lot of areas in France. And for them, I think it's safer for us, safer than us, for the African community. They speak French. They have and they have a huge community. They have big families here, and they have their own community. So the native French dare not touch those people. But for us, like yellow-skinned people, they would look down on us or they would be racist. They think that Asians are here for working as domestics or the low-paid jobs. They started. I find them very different than the time I was here as the diplomat, because I don't. Yeah, I mean, in general, no? I'm not to particular persons. Those who know me very well, of course, we have a very good relations. Yes.
So it's been a bit hard for you to adjust after the coup.
Yes.
I'm sorry to hear that. That highlights another challenge with how the coup has been impacting Burmese everywhere, inside and outside the country.
Yes. I'm sorry if I have some interruptions in between, some lack of sometimes I run out of vocabulary, and it's kind of I'm also suffering from mental health problems after the coup. When this is my personal experience. When I first came here, the place I lived was near to the airport, so quite often during the day I would hear planes flying over the sky, but they are low flying, and I heard the planes flying over me, and I would think of, oh no, where are they going to bomb the villages, or where are they going to bomb? In fact, I was just traumatized, and I had to tell myself, oh no, I'm in France. They are just commercial planes. They are just going their own way. You are not. I'm not supposed to worry for anything. And if I have to tell to myself again and again. But every time I heard the planes flying, I had the same reaction in the first place. So it is not very good. And another thing is that when I see people, enjoying life, like very normal in their parks, with their children, having everyday life, I cannot stand the sight of them for nothing. Because I would be thinking about the kids back in Myanmar where they have to run for their lives, when they died and when there's no chance to go to school and so on. So, and when we see the people last year especially protesting for no vaccination against COVID, and they would be shouting like liberté, which means liberty, freedom. I just wanted to send them to Myanmar. Go and shout for liberty, They are making a big issue just for the vaccines.
Yeah, I feel the same way, and that was what led to my question about how to break through. Is I see these so-called progressive groups advocating for different causes and rights in the United States, and they just don't lift a finger for an awareness or a concern about what's happening that is multitudes order worse in Myanmar. And I start to feel this growing frustration and even fury against the hypocrisy, not of these big international organizations, which I never really expected much more of. I'm of course very disappointed, but the hypocrisy of different Western progressive groups that are espousing these ideals and values and continuing to rally online about whatever cause or microaggressions or triggers that they want to promote in terms of advocating or highlighting some kind of victimization in Western society that is so outrageous and atrocious. And yet these same groups are just not lifting a finger to have the slightest interest or awareness or concern for things that are just atrocious over there. And it's made me really not take any of them seriously and just think like, how do you even dare to pretend like you care about these things when this is happening right here? You have so much access to information and you're just standing by.
Yeah, it's very sad.
Well, with that, I thank you so much for joining us and taking the time to talk about these topics. We've been able to have some insight into the importance in the world of diplomatic circles, and it's been very educational for me, I think also for our listeners. And thank you for also sharing about your personal journey. I'm sorry that so many of us are going through this now.
Thank you very much.
Spending these 2 hours with us.
Thank you very much to you also for giving me the chance to talk to.
We'd like to take this time to thank our generous supporters who have already given. We simply cannot continue to provide you with this content and information without the wonderful support of generous listeners, donors, and friends like you. Each episode helps in providing access to one more voice, one more perspective, one more insight. Every donation of any size is greatly appreciated, and it helps us to continue this mission. We greatly appreciate your generosity, which allows us to maintain this platform and everything else we do. If you would like to join in our mission to support those in Myanmar who are being impacted by the military coup, we welcome your contribution in any form, currency, or transfer method. Your donation will go to support a wide range of humanitarian missions, aiding those local communities who need it most. Donations are directed to such causes as the Civil Disobedience Movement, CDM, families of deceased victims, internally displaced person (IDP) camps, food for impoverished communities, military defection campaigns, undercover journalists, monasteries and nunneries, education initiatives, the purchasing of protective equipment and medical supplies, COVID relief, and much more. We also make sure that our donation fund supports a diverse range of religious and ethnic groups across the country. We invite you to visit our website to learn more about past projects as well as upcoming needs. You can give a general donation or earmark your contribution for a specific activity or project you would like to support, perhaps even something you heard about in this very episode. All of this humanitarian aid work is carried out by our nonprofit mission, Better Burma. Any donation you give on our Insight Myanmar website is directed towards this fund. Alternatively, you can also visit the Better Burma website, betterburma.org. That's BETTERBURMA.org, and donate directly there. In either case, your donation goes to the same cause, and both websites accept credit cards. You can also give via PayPal by going to paypal.me/betterburma. Additionally, we take donations through Patreon, Venmo, GoFundMe, and Cash App. Simply search Better Burma on each platform and you'll find our account. You can also visit either the Insight Myanmar or Better Burma websites for specific links to those respective accounts, or email us at info@betterburma.org. If you'd like to give in another way, please contact us. Thank you so much for your kind consideration and support.